Hello, welcome to the BT Sports Score studio. We're going to be live on BT Sport 1 HD and live and free for you to watch on Twitter as well at 2:45 today with all of the action up and down the country and around Europe as well. And as you can see, I'm joined by Owen Hargreaves, Tim Sherwood, John Hartson and Robbie Savage. So let's chat about the big footballing news of the world, really, that hit us yesterday. Arsene Wenger announced that he will be stepping down as the Arsenal boss at the end of the season after 22 years in charge. There's only one place for me to start. John, you were at Arsenal in '96 when Arsene Wenger arrived at the club. How big of a change did he make there straight away?
Well, I think if you look at the senior players at the time, the Arsenal captain, England captain Tony Adams, David Seaman, Ian Wright, Merson, all these guys, I think they would admit now themselves that Arsene Wenger, being at the football club, put 3 or 4 years on top of their careers. The way that he changed all the supplements that he brought in, the food, the way we ate, the way that we stretched after training, everything was done, you know, it was planned. His training sessions were all timed, you know, on a watch, and we'd run for 25 minutes at the start of every training session just to get all that lactic acid out. That had never been known before. It was always just a little circle, 2 of the youngest in the middle, playing around the two in the middle. But Arsene Wenger changed it all, eh?
Down the pub after.
Yeah, well, I was going to go into that. But, no, but he did change everything. He was an absolute gentleman as well. I never heard him swear.
You left Arsenal less than a year into his tenure there, yet you always speak of him so fondly. It just shows what a great man he was and how highly you speak of him.
I do. I think he's a gentleman. As I said, he wanted me to stay. He wanted me to stay and learn off Dennis Bergkamp and Ian Wright, but I had Harry Redknapp on the phone, and Harry can be quite persistent when he wants something, you know. But it's interesting because I left Arsenal in 1997, and they did the double in '98. So what a good decision that was. But no, he was fantastic, and not just me. I think when he speak to all his former players. You know, they speak about him in glowing terms. And
also, you played against Arsenal's sides with Arsene Wenger as the manager, but also you managed against Arsene Wenger's sides as well. What was it like pitting your teams and yourself and your teammates against him?
Well, I think he's always had good players. He's always had a philosophy what he sticks by. I think that eventually has become his downfall. I think his biggest strength was his stubbornness, and his biggest weakness was his stubbornness. And I think that's come home to roost. You know, he's not willing to change and move away from what he believes in, and ultimately they've got stuck and they haven't moved on with the time. So no, he's, like John says, I think now's the time. I think he's made a good decision, or the club have to come out and disarm everyone now. You know, and he's going to get a lot of plaudits, and quite rightly so, for his time at Arsenal Football Club. You know, the transition of that club and building a new stadium. But I think also we have to say Arsenal Football Club has been very good for Arsene Wenger as well.
Yeah. And it's clear the Arsenal players are very fond of Arsene Wenger. And Robbie, you've had to say goodbye to managers that you've been very fond of in your career, haven't you? Likes of Mark Hughes and also Martin O'Neill in your time.
Hi, Jules.
What's it like when a manager tells the players that he's leaving and yet you've still got to play under him for another few games?
For me, it was Martin O'Neill. You know, at Leicester City, I was devastated because, you know, he bought me. You know, I was playing week in, week out under him, and, you know, I wasn't in my comfort zone because with Martin, you couldn't be in your comfort zone. But, you know, when a manager who's picking you week in, week out decides to go to another club, you're thinking, who's the next manager going to be? Is he going to like me? Am I going to be in his side? So I was devastated when Martin O'Neill went to Celtic. Yeah, OK. And, Owen, you scored quite a few famous goals against Arsene Wenger's side, one particular for Alex Ferguson's Manchester United. And there was such a famous rivalry between those two managers, wasn't there? What was Fergie's attitude towards Wenger?
Well, I think they were completely different personalities. I think John's right in the sense he was a gentleman, wasn't he? Arsene Wenger, he conducted himself with such class always in his interviews, and I think any player would have loved to play for him. I think Sir Alex was a completely different character. I think when we didn't perform well, we knew about it pretty quickly. And I think Tim is probably right in that sense. Maybe he was almost too nice to a lot of these players, and maybe some of his players, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe they abused that ever so slightly, because I think he probably deserved a better send-off than he had. I think that the first 10 years were absolutely remarkable. And then I think in the end, the players that came into the club, they didn't really have those Vieiras and the Keelns and the Adams and the players that kind of managed the dressing room. So I think maybe he was, because he was such a gentleman, maybe he was a bit sometimes easy on the players. And I think the new generation prefer that. But I think with Sir Alex, we always knew where we stood. and we were always scared of him, and we didn't want to disappoint him, so we went out and played that way. And I think that's where management maybe has changed and evolved, that style of management you don't really see anymore.
Yeah, I think the timing of Arsene Wenger's announcement is what's kind of shaken things up a bit. We did a poll to ask whether you guys think it was the correct decision for Arsene Wenger to step down now. The current results have over 20,000 votes on our BT Sports Score poll. You can still vote on this now. 88% say yes, it was the correct decision, and just 12% say no. So, Tim, you mentioned this just a moment ago, and you have said in the past as well that you think that Arsenal perhaps need a different voice.
I do, yeah, and I think it is good timing. They've still got an opportunity to win the Europa League, and I think you'll see that stadium full up on Monday night, against West Ham. We haven't seen that. They've voted on their feet. They've decided not to go to the football club. Probably the best thing, rather than carrying them silly banners of Arsene Wenger out. Now we're going to see him come and stick together, give the guy what he deserves, which is a great ovation and a great send-off, and it's going to help the side. They're going to need all the help they possibly can get against Atletico Madrid.
Yeah, it's the end of an era now, isn't it, Owen, for this Arsenal team and this Arsenal side, but it's the start of a new one, and I think that there might be some Arsenal fans slightly wary of who's going to come in next, particularly if we compare this to when Fergie left United, albeit he left as champions of the Premier League. But who do you think the next appointment is absolutely crucial, or do you think they can take a chance?
I think they might take a chance, and I think it might be somebody like Patrick Vieira. I think Tim's right in the sense Arsenal in a different place, in the sense they're only going to go up. They'll never finish below 6, I don't think. This is probably the worst ever season they could possibly have. They've got some terrific players at that football club, amazing stadium, great fan base, terrific training ground. They have virtually everything there to take the next step. Maybe invest a bit more money in players, maybe invest a bit more money in wages, but I think they're there to take the next step. And I'd love to see a guy like Vieira get it. He's in the DNA of the football club. The fans would embrace him. He'll play Arsene's way and carry on that legacy that Arsene built so successfully.
OK, well, we're going to chat more about the potential replacements of who's going to take over as the Arsenal boss later on in the show on BT Sport 1 HD, so make sure you join us for that. But for now, we thought we'd reflect on some amazing years that Arsene Wenger has had at Arsenal Football Club and put together a combined 11. So these guys have all been picking. You've all had a vote, haven't you guys? So we've done a combined 11 because obviously some of you have made slightly different choices. So we're going to start off in goal, and it was a unanimous decision. The goalkeeper, David Seaman. Other contenders, of course, Jens Lehmann and Petr Cech. But, John, did you pick Seaman as yours?
I did. I went with David Seaman for the period that I was there. Even things on a Friday morning, we do a lot of shooting, and you had Bergkamp, you had Wright, you had Merson, who could beat most goalkeepers. There's so much ability. But David Seaman would stop everything. He had strong hands, agility. He was 6'4", and for me, at that period, 95 to 97, I think he was the best goalkeeper in the world. So I've gone with Seaman. Just
to interrupt you there, John, because I know this will interest you, Hibs are 2-0 up on Celtic now, so it looks like Celtic aren't going to win the league today.
No, they got an opportunity now to win it next week against Rangers at home.
Wow, interesting stuff.
I'm not too sure whether the authorities would be too happy about that. But no, it's great. I think that's Neil Lennon's team. Hibs up to joint second now with alongside Aberdeen.
Yeah.
And so, they've had a really good season, Neil Lennon at Hibs. I'm not really surprised.
No.
I think today the Hibs players have shown, that I think they've been the better team. They've created more opportunities in that game.
OK, more Scottish stuff. You're going to be watching some Scottish games
for us
on the show.
I'm watching Kilmarnock, Aberdeen today.
Indeed. Right, let's get back to this Arsenal combined 11. Robbie, in defence. Obviously, we're playing a 4-4-2 because that's how Arsene Wenger set up majority of his teams in his time. Dixon, Adams, Campbell and Cole. So I've got to ask you, Robbie, was Cole the best left-back in the world in your eyes?
Oh, for that period of time, yeah. You say about modern-day full-backs now, we love to get forward, getting overlaps, be attacking, and I think he was one of the first. I remember Cafu for Brazil, he was amazing. Ashley Cole, for me at that period, was one of the best left-backs in the world, if not the best.
And then Tony Adams, he's an Arsenal legend. Players absolutely love him, don't they? And the fans as well. He was a player transformed by Wenger over his time, wasn't he?
He was. I mean, John was talking about that ageing back four. What he inherited were very well drilled by George Graham, and I think what helped him out is putting two monsters like Vieira and Petit in the midfield rather than stopping them eating certain food in the in the restaurant, which might give him a couple more years. But no, Tony was great. Probably Tony's one of the very few people who haven't got too many nice things to say about Arsene Wenger.
Yeah, and the midfield, you mentioned them there, Vieira and Petit. You already mentioned him as well. Vieira, you want him to get the manager's role at Arsenal next. What was it like, Robbie, playing against this midfield pairing?
That was easy, Jules. For me, being obviously not half was near as good as those two, for me to compete against those in the Premier League was amazing. People say about, now, is it the best time in the Premier League? But I honestly believe that when we played in the Premier League, that was so tough. That midfield.
Did you almost sometimes go out there thinking, oh, God, this is going to be embarrassing for me today?
The time at Arsenal, it was at Highbury. That was unbelievable. They were so good. They used to hammer us, every time we played against them. But I believe that era was the best.
Going back to Vieira as well, sorry, Robbie. So Arsene Wenger almost brought him with him immediately. He came from AC Milan and just over 4 million. But he was 17 years of age, and he was, I think, in terms of coaching a player, a lot of players, how do you teach Alan Shearer how to score a goal? It's very difficult, How do you teach Chris Sutton how to bring it down on his chest? A lot of it is natural. But in terms of Patrick Vieira, he was very gangly. He's sort of running all over the place. I think the Wenger-Vieira, that combination, coach and player, he turned Vieira into a world-class player. Of course, as well, he had that self-confidence. He was a top player. But Arsene Wenger helped him. I remember after training in certain sessions, he would take Vieira one-on-ones and work with him specifically on things. So Wenger was vital to Vieira.
And Owen, what about these wingers, Perez and Overmars? I mean, what a pairing. Overmars wasn't at Arsenal for long, was he? But he scored that iconic goal at Old Trafford in their first title triumph, didn't they?
Well, I just think all those players, you talk about Petit, you talk about Vieira, those players play now in that Arsenal team. That team could probably win the Premier League now. That's what it had all those attributes. Overmars on his day, he'd still be one of the best wingers in the Premier League now. And I thought Perez, he scores some of the best goals you ever see. And he had a spell where he was probably one of the best players in the Premier League, if not the best. So. And
he was a typical Wenger player, Perez, wasn't he?
He was a flair player, but I think as much as he loved those flair players, I think you talk about Petit and Vieira, they had as Tim said, they were monsters, but they could play, but they were hard. They were tough. They would grind out games, which you need to in the Premier League. Even Bergkamp, you could leave one on you. They could be nasty at times. And I think that's what's missing from that Arsenal team now is they could all play in this team, but they had personality, they had character. When it was tough, they would rise to the occasion.
They were taught that by the back four, what he inherited. When they come in, I think the likes of Tony and Keown and Bold and Lee Dixon, Winterburn,
we had something similar with Cristiano at United. He came in, he was a flair player, but, the lads were so tough on him, and Gary Neville and Paul Scholes and Giggsy, and, in terms of demanding that every day. And I think it helps those players grow to that level.
Yeah, and there's a few comments coming through on Twitter and on Facebook saying, what about Freddy Limburg?
He was close, wasn't he?
He was close, Freddie, because Freddie could affect the game. I mean, he could score goals. He wasn't as silky as Perez and Overmars. He had lightning pace, but I think that Freddie could affect the game. He certainly drifted off that left-hand side and scored plenty of goals for Arsenal.
Jules, I think the big one was these three didn't go for Martin Keown.
Ooh.
I did.
So did I. You went with Campbell.
I went with Sol Campbell, I think.
You did, yeah.
Listen, Martin Keown, I think he's unlucky not to get in that side. I went for Sol Campbell. When we played against Arsenal, as I said, Martin Keown, what a defender, and John will probably have...
But the one for me as well, right, maybe didn't have the silky skills of a Lundberg or didn't have the pace of an Overmars. But the one for me that was there from the start to the finish was Ray Parlour.
It was my vote.
Now, Ray, on that right-hand side, he would cover every blade of grass. He had a goal in him. He loved to tackle. He was up and down.
Could play inside.
He was a real mainstay out of all them superstars, if you like.
Yeah.
Ray Parlour was there, got his testimonial. And he was a real Wenger favourite.
All right, well, let's finish off our 11 then. And with the strikers, Thierry Henry and Dennis Bergkamp. I mean, you guys couldn't have picked any other. John, you played with Bergkamp, didn't you? Is he up there with the best players you've ever played with?
Yeah, he was just phenomenal. I think everything Dennis did, he did with class. And he was so... He used to float, Dennis. He just used to float across the ground. And I always said if he played in the snow, he wouldn't leave any footprints. That's how good Dennis Bergkamp was. But technically, as Owen said, he had a little bit of dig in him as well. He had the other side of the game. But magnificent. I think for kids, young aspiring footballers watching this today, go and buy Dennis Bergkamp's 100 goals for Arsenal, or best ever 100 goals. Every single one of them is a goal of the season contender. He was unbelievable.
Do you know what the amazing thing is there when we see that side? If you're looking at, you know, not one player from recent times has been in that side. If you look at City, their best ever team over the last 22 years, there'll be a lot of players.
Current players,
you know, Manchester United, maybe not. You know, the same as Arsenal. Liverpool, you might get Salah in. You know, what a team they had, Rush, Dalglish over the last 20 years. But not one player gets in that Arsenal side from, well, how long? For 10 years?
10 years,
15 years, yeah.
Well, let's end on Arsene Wenger's probably greatest success story.
Celtic.
Yes, another goal. Is that from Celtic?
Yeah,
OK, so 2-1 to Hibs now in that game. And we have to say, Premier League news, West Brom have got 2 goals back, guys. It's 2-2 between West Brom and Liverpool. So they are still putting a fight in the baggies, 2-2 in that game. So let's just talk about Thierry Henry then, Owen, to finish things off. Arsene Wenger's greatest success story. He transformed him into one of the greatest players of all time.
Yeah, I think he probably had that vision in terms of taking him from being a winger, came from Juventus and playing him as a centre forward. But first of all, you got to be, how big is Thierry? What, 6'2"? To be that quick, technically that gifted. You know, obviously he needs that mentoring that Wenger had, but he had that ability to grow into. I thought he was absolutely frightening, and Thierry Henry, one of the best ever.
Guys, I think that's a pretty successful combined 11 you've picked out there. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be live, BT Sport 1 HD with BT Sport Score at 2:45, and we're live on Twitter as well. And today we're going to be covering all the games in the Premier League, in the Football League, the National League, and games across Europe as well. So we'll see you then.